Okay, so let's talk about natural selection. There's several syllabus objectives. The first one here pretty well describes the process of natural selection, so we'll come back to that a few times. And then it introduces this idea of allele frequency. So let's look at these. So what is natural selection? Well, here's an example of it, and they say in a nutshell. So first of all, you can see that we've got variation in the phenotype of these bugs. And we've also got a selection pressure. That selection pressure is that these birds preferentially target and eat the green bugs. So what's going to happen is that over time, we're going to see a change in the phenotype and a change in the allele frequency. Over time, we're going to see an increase in the number of orange bugs. Why? Well, because they're going to live for longer and reproduce more. And they're going to pass those favourable genes, those favourable alleles, on to the next generation. So over time, we're going to see an increase in the allele frequency for the orange coloured shell. Equally, we're going to see a reduction in the allele for the green shell and a decrease in the phenotype for the green shell. So that, in a sense, is natural selection. It's a change in allele frequency and phenotype over time, and it's not random. It's because of a selection pressure that selects for a particular phenotype because it provides a survival advantage. So, putting in words then, it's the non-random change in allele frequency to provide a survival and a reproductive advantage. Requires two things. Requires variation, and also there needs to be some sort of selection pressure. So let's go through and explain those in a bit more detail. Firstly, variation, of course, is difference in individuals in a population. And we see generally that that's distributed with a normal distribution, and most organisms would have a sort of like an intermediate phenotype. And variation is actually really important for the survival of a species because it's that range that the species are able to tolerate. There's always some organisms that have adaptations or variations that allow them to survive outside of that optimum range. And if there's a change in the environment, a selection pressure that might favour one side or the other, then it's going to allow those to survive. And the more variation there is, the more able the species is to survive if there's a change. How does variation occur? Well, of course, it occurs through sexual reproduction with independent assortment, crossing over and recombination, and of course, random fertilization. But mutations are really important because it's only mutations that actually are the source of new alleles into a population. So if that's variation, selection pressure there is environmental factors that can influence the survival and reproductive success of an organism. So environmental factors that influence the survival and reproductive success of an organism. This is exactly what the syllabus says. It says natural selection occurs when the pressures of environmental selection confer a selective advantage on a specific phenotype to enhance its survival and reproduction. Survival, they use the word viability, and reproduction, they use the word fecundity. Now, I'm going to define both of those on the next slide. But there's a lot here, but it's really good. So natural selection is the mechanism we're talking about. It occurs when there's environmental pressures. So environmental factors that provide an advantage, a reproductive and a survival advantage to a specific phenotype. So again, they live for longer, they reproduce more, and they pass on the alleles for that favourable phenotype to the next generation. So viability then is the ability to live, grow and develop, the ability to survive. and fecundity is the ability to produce offspring. So if the purpose of life is to not die and reproduce, that's exactly what we're talking about here. Now, the second syllabus objective is that you need to be able to identify that the selection of allele frequency in a gene pool can be positive or negative. Some are selected for and some are selected against. Firstly, let's introduce this term gene pool. Look, gene pool is the combination of all of the alleles present in a population. The larger the gene pool, the greater the genetic diversity, the better the population is to be able to withstand environmental changes. So let's consider this positive and negative selection. The syllabus objective said that the selection of allele frequency in a gene pool can be positive or negative. So if we've got environmental pressures that confer a selective advantage, we're going to see an increase in the frequency of those alleles. The alleles that provide a phenotype that has a selective advantage. And whereas you're going to see a reduction in the allele frequency of those alleles that don't provide a selective advantage. So if you have a look at an example here, these are the classic peppered moths. So prior to the Industrial Revolution, when the oak trees had white bark, you can see that the white-coloured moths had the selective advantage, the survival advantage, and so you can see that their population was high, and the black ones who didn't have the reproductive advantage, their population was low. So we could say that the white moths, there was an increased allele frequency of the allele that provides the white phenotype compared with the black. Now, but we do see variation. There's difference in the phenotype and the alleles. We also see that there's an environmental pressure. There was an environmental pressure, and that changed because during and post-Industrial Revolution, these white oak trees turned grey or black because of the soot from the factories. So there was a change in the environment that created environmental pressure. This time, it selected for the black moths and selected against the white moths. So we see that the black moths have a survival advantage, and we see that this means that we have an increase in the allele frequency of the black moths and a reduction in the allele frequency for the white moths. So here was the syllabus objectives again and a summary. Basically, mutations lead to variation in the phenotype of a population. Natural selection acts on the phenotype variation in a population. The phenotype with a selective advantage has a greater viability and fecundity, so their allele frequency increases. There's positive selection for those traits, whereas the ones that don't confer an advantage, we see a reduction in the allele frequency. And very importantly, it's not random.